Good morning. Today is Thursday, February 10th, 2011, and you're here at Historic Bratonsville with Carolina Considered. Who are we talking with today?
Van Shields.
And what's your job here, Mr. Shields, at Historic Bratonsville?
Bob, I hope I can call you Bob. I am
please.
Director and CEO of the Culture and Heritage Museums, which is the sort of parent organization for Historic Bratonsville, as well as 4 other museum-type facilities in York County, the Museum of York County, the McKelvey Center in the town of York, the Main Street Children's Museum in downtown Rock Hill, and Historic Bratonsville. Those are the 4 institutions that we have in place now. We're also working on developing a new museum on the Catawba River.
How in the world were you able to put together all of these disparate components into one institution? Where'd that all begin?
Well, the first cultural institution in York County outside of Winthrop University was an effort, a community-based effort of young women in the Junior Welfare League who wanted to bring arts and culture and a museum to Rock Hill. And at the time, this was in the late 1940s, they had become influenced by a movement to create cultural institutions and museums as one antidote to the dreaded juvenile delinquency. But also, I think Rock Hill being an up-and-coming and rising mill town, it had been in that vein for a long time. I think they thought that adding a cultural component to the fabric of the community would be a good thing. And so they started and incorporated, and I think in 1948, the Children's Nature Museum of Rock Hill, which had its first physical facility in Fuel Park in Rock Hill in 1950. Later in the 1950s, that same group of people convinced York County to step in and help the museum grow, and then it became a York County institution in terms of the real estate when they established the museum facility outside of Fuel Park and in a different part of the county in about 1960. And that became, I think, the Nature Museum of York County is what it was called at the time. Eventually it became the Museum of York County. Now, to do that, they had a popular referendum for the taxpayers to support the creation of millage associated with property taxes specifically designated for the Museum of York County. So that was, in effect, a special purpose tax district that people agreed to at that time, which was very, they were in the vanguard of that particular idea at that time to create a special.
That's not common in South Carolina, is it?
I don't think it was common anywhere necessarily at that time. I don't really know, but I know that now there are other special purpose tax districts in other cities, Denver and St. Louis, and many other cities and counties and municipalities. But I think it's still relatively rare for a county of this size, and certainly in South Carolina, which has been one of the reasons why there has been a steady drip of public funding that has helped contribute to the museum's success. And the museum, for years, like most museums, has relied on the 3-legged stool: private funding, public funding, as well as earned income. And it does so today. So that was the genesis of the museum. Then the other side of the story, in terms of bringing in Historic Bratonsville, was that in the late 1950s, I believe 1959, also at the encouragement of some community leaders, Sam Mendenhall having an interest in Historic Bratonsville, or in what was then called Bratonsville at the time, which was in decay, and realized the importance of it from a historical point of view. And at least there were buildings that were still here that were salvageable, including what became understood as the oldest surviving historic structure on its own foundation here at Bratonsville. He led a community-based effort to save Bratonsville and to encourage the county to establish a historical commission to help do that. This being, the historical commission actually preceded their interest in Bratonsville, but the two things were related. And actually, our historian Michael Scoggins can give you more detail on the technicalities of that. But again, it was a community-based effort led by a few people. In this case, one person being very prominent to try to save York County's historic treasures, and Bratonsville being among them. So the Historical Commission was formed. Bratonsville became one of its early causes, if you will, and eventually they started to restore Brattonsville, and that really sort of peaked in the first phase around the bicentennial in the 1970s. And then there started to be a professional staff. They were empowered by the county to create a professional staff, and they did, but they didn't have dedicated funding. They were a line item in the county budget and was very variable and very political in terms of their funding, whereas the museum had that stable base of funding that came from the millage, although it was also politically mitigated from year to year. So those two organizations coexisted for a long time. From what I understand, there was actually some talk in the 1980s about how maybe they should work together, collaborate, maybe even consolidate or merge, and those talks didn't go anywhere. When I arrived at the Museum of York County, I was attracted to the job.
What year was that?
That was 1997. I was ready to leave New York, and I was attracted to the job here because there had been some discussions among the Historical Commission, the Catawba Indian Cultural Preservation Project, the Museum of York County, and the Convention Visitors Bureau about working together to try to expand their service to the community, perhaps consolidate some efforts and what have you. And that discussion was intriguing to me because I saw a couple of things that were interesting about it. One was just the idea of mergers and collaboration among cultural institutions, which I had presided over a merger of some cultural institutions as chairman of an arts council board in California in the 1980s. And it was so obvious to me that they were duplicating service. And even somebody who loved the arts, I said, this just doesn't make any sense. I can't support both these things. And I got involved in the board of directors and said, there doesn't need to be this many. We have a long-standing discussion around here about how many nonprofits can the world handle, and how many can be doing the same thing sort of in different variations, and how they can work together and streamline and be more efficient. So that was intriguing to me. The other thing that was really intriguing to me was that the Museum of York County was a general museum, which is a way of saying that it didn't really have a specific focus. It was supposed to be about certain things. It was supposed to be a little bit about art, a lot about natural history, and a little bit about history. But they really weren't. There wasn't even a balance among that generality.
Driven by their collection?
Well, driven by their collections primarily, and quite frankly, I think a failure to envision. And so everything was in silos. And to me, the world is not in silos. And so to me, it was intriguing to me sort of philosophically that these different components could exist side by side. And I was sort of thinking what would happen if somebody broke down the barriers between those components, what could happen. So there was that kind of thing in the back of my mind strategically. And the fact that they were working with the Historical Commission was all about history. And the Catawba Indians, which was about an underappreciated part of our history, was very interesting to me too. So I was attracted to the job. I came here. I immediately, without knowing that there had been previous discussions about mergers, I immediately sensed that one of the fundamental problems we had in York County was that we had two different institutions competing for the same dollars from York County. Again, one had support because of millage, the other was lying on the budget. So I introduced into some cocktail conversations, maybe we should be working together. Then people said, well, that idea's been floated before and what have you. And for whatever reason, the timing, perhaps because of tenacity on my part, whatever, it started to get some traction. And I think the stakeholders then recognized that this was an idea that they could lift up and get behind and think about logically. And there was a little bit of turmoil with it. Obviously, there was some controversy. People thought it was going to be the death of this and the death of that and what have you. But I think that in my opinion, common sense won out. And the merger was authorized. I arrived here in January, and the merger was authorized in October.
Of 97?
Of 97. And in 1998, we had our full year of operations as a merged entity. Now, at that time, we had a vision that we would have one collections area, one archival area, one education department, one finance department, and so on and so on. And some of those things were easier to get done than others. And so it was pretty easy to have one finance department. It was pretty easy to have one marketing and development department. But when it got down to the actual lines of business as a museum, it was more difficult. There was a lot of resistance to change. People didn't understand it. They didn't understand why they had to think about the collections that were sitting over at the Museum of York County if you're sitting on top of collections. They didn't understand that the archival materials really were more than just what had traditionally been collected. There was, and this is natural. This was expected. It was kind of a surprise to me in some ways because I just thought if I waved my hand, everything would be okay. And I was stupid in that regard.
Like the military.
Well, I mean, yes, exactly. You will integrate tomorrow. And so to some extent, it was kind of shocking how much resistance there was to change. Now, I'm a change agent. I lived in 9 different places by the time I graduated from high school. So change was it was my breakfast. And so I didn't really think about it. Now, and so I learned a lot along the way about change, about when to give up on my pet ideas and to really work well within a team. But we still hadn't really achieved where we wanted to go in terms of an organization. Also, I knew that I needed help.